Hi, I'm Matthew Granade. I'm one of the co-founders of Domino. Thank you so much for coming today. I'm going to moderate the panel. And then, what we're going to talk about is, this trend of model-driven businesses that put models at the center of what they do, obviously has been extremely powerful for the last decade, created things like Amazon, created things like Netflix, created lots of other types of companies. And our panel today is going to talk about what comes next. And so I'll get into some more specific questions here in a minute, but first wanted to let each of the people quickly introduce themselves. So our panel of experts, Sri.
I don't know if I'm an expert, but hi, I'm Sri. I'm the managing partner of Point72 Ventures. We're an early stage venture capital firm. I'd like to still think that I'm a technical person, but I guess I've been an investor now for over 10 years. But I'm an engineer by background. I still say engineer when I enter the country and they ask me what my profession is. And but one of these days I won't be able to do that anymore.
That could be government fraud, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
It's all right. He's on the inside.
Yeah.
I'm Ash. Together with my partner Mark Gorenberg and we were lucky enough to start working with Domino as their investors in 2015. We subsequently invested in a whole bunch of machine learning focused companies at a firm called Zetta. And I also wrote a book called The AI First Company about how to define and build the competitive advantage that machine learning uniquely grants you.
Hi everybody, my name is Hanna Helin and I've worked for LSEC, so London Stock Exchange Group, like everybody always puzzled about the new name these days. So I'm driving our technology innovation program where we look at emerging technologies, ecosystem engagements and kind of like digitalization of the whole organization. So very nice to be here.
Great. I'm Andonyadis. I lead the data science and AI team for the West North America for Capgemini. Emphasizing a little bit more on end-to-end projects where we're not using data science for implementation, but also we're doing data science strategy as well as data science adoption.
Great. So, so my sort of thesis about all this is that it starts with the technology, and that what kind of model-driven businesses we're going to have next comes from what kind of technology is at the cutting edge right now. And so I wanted to take the first 5 or 10 minutes of the panel and have each of you, and obviously we'll have some conversation as well, talk about what you see as the cutting edge. I mean, some form of machine learning AI has been around for a very long time. What is literally being enabled, right now over the last 24 months, over the next 24 months, that's going to drive this next wave of expansion and change? And Sri, I'm going to start with you, and we'll just kind of go down the panel and get some views, but feel free to debate with each other as well.
Sure. I'll start with, I think what most people in ML have been tracking is that these large language models have become extraordinarily powerful, right? Back when sort of deep learning started to really impact business, where we saw the most impact was computer vision applications. It's where we saw companies being founded, we saw applications where AI could do as well as human beings in certain tasks. But I remember somebody chatted with me, a senior government person was like, hey, one thing I always think about is a fly can see, but only human beings can write and to speak, right? And so the real frontier is natural language. Can you write? Can you read? Can you understand? And if I'm being honest, while NLP has made progress for the last decade, the progress has not been substantive enough to, I think, really drive valuable sort of business transformation. I think that's changed in the last 24 months, right? These enormous language models have learned from the entirety of the internet that what the benefit is, if you could think about previously a generative text model could maybe write a sentence, now you can write a paragraph, you can write a page. That's the difference between something that's not valuable and something that is valuable, right? Where previously perhaps you had to train algorithms specifically for your tasks, and that made it very difficult for companies to scale by selling into enterprises. These large models have made it possible to have to do very little because they've learned so much about the language in general that you don't have to tune very much, and that makes these generic models actually valuable in lots of business use cases. So that's the one that I think about probably the most.
Before Ash jumps in, where would you say the language models are right now relative to humans?
I still think that, obviously, Ash can write a book, and
Pretty good book too.
Yeah, right. But like I don't think models are there yet, right? And so, like I said, I actually think like the easiest framework for people to think about is like, you know, what used to be a sentence that could be written is now a paragraph or perhaps 2 paragraphs, right? And human beings can still write, you know, 50 pages, 100 pages, 1,000 pages, right? And so there's still, I think, a significant advantage. But if you think about what needs to be written at the page level or at the paragraph level, that's emails, that's blog posts, that's marketing content, that's lots of different things that are still valuable like business use cases. And so I think that's probably where I would stack it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key word there was enablement. We can talk about all the wonderful research going on and keep our heads in the clouds for a while here, but where I'm seeing the planes land, so to speak, where the rubber's hitting the road is exactly where Sri's seeing it hit across thousands of companies that I see every year. And you know, what does this really mean? Like, how does this change products that are enabled by AI? Or how does the enablement happen through some sort of killer feature in a product? It's that now if a model can understand language, you can speak to it. And so you can prompt it, you can train it by just saying yes, no, this result was good because, or that, or whatever. You don't have to interact with it on its terms, like we've previously had to interact with models, as in you don't have to classify something in a binary way, you don't have to draw a box around something, you don't have to interact with it in a way that's unnatural for a human, you can interact with it in a way that is natural for a human. And you know, I don't want to bring the ghost of Noam Chomsky into the debate, but you know, everything's sort of language, right? If you think about thought, if you think about having ideas, structuring things, coming up with ideas for, you know, large chunks of things we want to communicate to another person, maybe that all, without language, maybe those ideas don't even happen, or vice versa. But the point is, once we do have these innovations, the actual products we interact with change, and then the interesting thing is what that enables. So that's a long way of saying I completely agree with Sri.
And I guess from our perspective, like what we have seen is that the financial industry has obviously, you know, as they have adapted to, you know, public cloud capabilities, so AWS's, Google's, Azure's of the world, there's also this like wide range of different ecosystem providers in this space. So what we have really seen is that obviously, you know, data science platforms such as Domino coming into play, lots of different, like each individual data scientist seems to have their own requirements and, you know, what they want to get from the platform. And then I think on top of that, really the baseline, like as you look at the data, like how do you manage the data, all the different data management capabilities, kind of like maybe more boring tasks to start with, and obviously what we learned also in the keynote speech earlier today. So that's the baseline that we have really seen. And I think from our perspective, we have been looking at it kind of like from the perspective that how do we transform our organization to leverage these capabilities internally, but then also externally really serve our customers in those different chosen environments. So I guess in the nutshell, it feels very fast-moving environment, and those customer requirements are changing all the time. So interesting environment.
And just to jump in for one sec, I think it's important to recognize it's not just the models, it is the data management that's changing. You know, whether it's Apache Arrow or some sort of new vector database like Semi, in which they're invested to disclose, the way that we represent data in databases is enabling this as well, not just the new modeling techniques.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that as well, like I think when we look at it from the data management perspective, I think as you start getting into these more specific use cases, thinking about like KYC or risk management, where you really need to understand that, I don't know, who is the individual or who is the private company that you are screening, it's actually still quite hard for AI to construct those challenges. So hopefully, you know, we'll be getting there later on.
Yeah, and these are great points. And from an end-to-end perspective, right, you start with the data. I'm seeing like a lot of changes, especially on the synthetic data, and not only for the deep learning. Moving a little bit on, you've heard about the cookie deprecation and everything that's happening there and how you can link it. So we'll start talking about a little bit more advanced analytics on entity matching, entity resolution. Leading into, I think, the biggest change, which is MLOps, where we're moving from pretty much calling MLOps DevOps with a little bit of ML sprinkle on top of it. But it's about how do you take the models and combine it with the other models. Even now in MLOps, we're talking about a specific use case every time. but businesses have multiple use cases that now need to be stacked together, synthesized together, and how that also goes into beyond the term AI ops, which is a little bit more towards IT, where you go into the business AI ops, which is how do you create that cycle of understanding how your models are not just increasing the accuracy of your KPIs and your metrics, but how that's going to redefine your existing process, and what's the next question that you need to come up that needs to be answered, and how that's going to change, again, processes within business and IT.
So let's talk a little bit about how the trends you all just mentioned, as well as the trends that came before that, are going to impact incumbents. One of the sort of commonly held theses for a while was that incumbents actually had a pretty interesting advantage in the ML revolution in that they had all this data. And that one of the big challenges of being a startup was you had to get the data. So Alex, I'm going to actually start back. I'm going to start at the other end this time. You do a lot with large businesses. What are you seeing? Like what is the cutting edge there?
Actually, the cutting edge is not as sexy, let's say, as everybody thinks it is. The big problem now is people are getting warm with the whole data science concept, right? We're talking, a lot of the conversations that we had is IT is getting comfortable with data science, right? They're not that territorial. They're opening up on that direction. The problem here is how do you maintain that knowledge and how do you spread that across the industry, especially now with the whole attrition movement. The problem is a little bit more basic. How do you create those boundaries? How do you create that knowledge, the centralization of knowledge, the data, what the models are doing, and how do you spread that out? Because now you're talking about specific data scientists. You have your research scientists, which are data scientists on roids essentially, and you have your product data science. All these different decentralized positions that you need to centralize the knowledge. And I think that's the next big step, and how that gets integrated with the whole movement of MLOps.
Do you see some industries being either moving faster or being more ripe for this change than others?
I would say some industries need it more than you would expect. So tech industry, you would expect they would have it all figured out. I think they have the biggest problem. I think they have the biggest cost of opportunity on that side. And then you have other industries that usually lag on the data science side. So, manufacturing, automotive, because they're not moving that fast, they're doing things a little bit more right. So they're not having those regression problems where they have to come back and fix.
So, Hanna, I'm going to come to you next to talk a little bit about financial services, but just one more question for you, Alex. When we're 5 years from now or 10 years from now, what industry panels do you think we're going to have here at this conference where it's like, wow, it is really, the incumbents have been revolutionized by machine learning?
Yeah, I would say we're going to see a switch in manufacturing. That's what I'm expecting. That's something that's been lagging, and we're seeing right now with all the shortages where industries like supply chain that were not that big are becoming big again. Manufacturing and understanding how we can optimize, not only the cost, but also operations. I think that's where it goes to, mostly manufacturing and those type of industries there, yeah.
Just to set a little context around that for folks, the industry panels this time are essentially biotech, healthcare, insurance, and defense. In 5 years, you come back for the manufacturing panel. We'll see you here, same day. What's your perspective on how these trends are going to impact incumbents? I'm guessing in particular in financial services, but you're welcome to go wherever you want.
Yeah. I think so. We need to stay very open to this change. Like I think there's with these more traditional institutions that do have data. Like obviously we have lots of data as an organization, both from the exchange perspective as well as from the data management perspective as we look at financial risk data. So the way that we engage with the market, it kind of comes back to the ecosystem. So we acknowledge the fact that we shouldn't be building everything in-house, So I think really as a core, and this is kind of like what our group is doing within the technology innovation team, is that we are really screening the market, that what is happening, what are the latest and greatest emerging technologies that are happening in the marketplace, who are the key ecosystem players that we really need to look at, and then plug those in back to the the technology backend for the organization. And I think we obviously serve kind of like the rest of the organization with the capabilities. And I think it again comes back to the point that it's very rapidly changing world. We need to make sure that as we combine our data and then give those kind of cutting edge capabilities for our teams, like that's basically the core baseline for it. Obviously we are highly regulated, so we need to always keep that in mind as well, which is obviously slightly different when you start looking at startup companies which can move very, very, very fast.
Whatever they want.
Exactly, absolutely. So it's quite different from that angle. But I think that's kind of like the foundation, like staying open, like really acknowledging the fact that the world is moving, you need to transform, and I think that's the way to stay relevant in a nutshell.
So financial services is obviously vast and impacts our lives in lots and lots of ways. I mean, if we're 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, what product do you think, or what sub part of finance do you think we're going to sort of all sit here and be like, wow, like that experience is so much better because of machine learning. There's banking, there's insurance, there's on and on and on and on. Do you see a certain sub segment of it that's particularly ripe?
Well, I think I've been following, and I think people are laughing at me when I might say this, but kind of like the whole like metaverse combination with AI. I think it's really interesting, like as we start looking at kind of customer service use cases. Like again, I'm not talking necessarily about metaverse in the avatar-like of way, like, oh, let's be in this environment where everybody are avatars. But there's something there that I think, taking the experience to the next level with the whole like Web3, metaverse, like that whole experience, I think that's really interesting theme to follow. Again, is it going to be ready within 5 years? I'm not sure. It might take a little bit longer than that, but I think that's something that I think personally I'm following very closely.
So like if I'm just to pull that thread a little bit, so like if I'm having some question about my Fidelity account, I may walk into the metaverse and get the answer there instead of calling a very helpful customer service representative.
Yeah, exactly. And hopefully it's not the same kind of experience that we are seeing with the chatbots at the moment, right? Kind of get to this endless cycle for asking more and more, or kind of repeating what you want to get out of it.
So are the clients that you're seeing and working with? I mean, do you think like to take like Fidelity and and all the interactive brokers, are they all going to need a metaverse strategy?
I believe so. So I think this kind of coming back to the, like obviously Microsoft has been promoting this very heavily, and I think they have been quite active in the market saying that every single company will need to have their own metaverse strategy. And I think we have started seeing that already. Like there have been a couple of those announcements already that they are creating those, and I think they acknowledge the fact that they will be serving younger audience as well, which don't necessarily they haven't been used to these lengthy engagements with banks. So I think it's kind of like you're looking at like 15, 20 years, old people who will expect completely different experience,
Right. Either you want to jump in on the incumbents?
Yeah, I think in my experience consulting with and talking to large incumbent companies, whether it's in financial services or in industry or otherwise, is the thing that holds them back from actually engaging in a real machine learning or data strategy is organizing their data. They want their data, their digital transformation project to be finished. They want their database to be picture perfect representation of the world and whatever else before they think about machine learning at all. And that's been the thing that's held them back a lot. What's quite interesting is that some of the recent models that are sort of coming into the world allow you to do a huge amount with absolutely no organization of your data at all. So if you think about the multimodal models, you can feed them text and images and a video, and maybe this image is labeled and this text is sort of related to that video, but it's not explicitly linked, and then this video is completely unlabeled. You can throw them all of that stuff, and then it'll come out with an output that can describe what's in a scene, or reverse, can generate a scene. And so the point is, a lot of these multimodal models, this thing that DeepMind came out with called Perceiver, a lot of these models allow you to just throw anything in disorganized, unlabeled, unmapped, and whatever else. And then the model will link these things together and be able to learn from these sort of mismatched examples. And the thing that really enables is for incumbents to start with machine learning without having their sort of platonic ideal of a database and of labeled data and of organized information, which is what holds most people back. And so that is what I think could be really exciting over the next couple of years. I mean, these models only came out in the really good ones in the last year and a half.
I think that this is at the heart of what Ash and I have to think about every day, right? And if you think about it, I have a simple framework for where you want to invest, which is either you believe you can invest in a company that can go and dominate the existing incumbents and take over a market, or you believe a company can sell into the existing incumbents and win, right? There's basically nothing else. There are very few like, brand new markets that never existed before. For the most part, we end up looking at companies like, hey, do I want to invest in a company that's applying machine learning to dominate an area of manufacturing, or do I want to invest in a company that sells software or products to these existing manufacturers? And a lot of it has to do, and that's where we end up having to spend a bunch of time understanding what's the culture of these organizations institutionally across this industry. Are they the kinds that will buy technology or not? Are they the kinds that have been actually collecting data and building a strategic advantage over time or not, right? And so, like, I happen to believe that the incumbents in insurance will win because I think they have been collecting data over time, right? I happen to think that there's opportunities for brand new manufacturers because a lot of existing manufacturers haven't been collecting data for the last couple of decades. And so that's something I think about a lot. That's sort of what it comes down to. And so when I think about, like, what are the industries where I see there'll be panels for in the next 5 years, there's this open question around which of these industries have invested in collecting data over the last few years or not, right? But there's all this framework I have, which is I honestly believe in the next 5 years we're going to see like very, very labor-intensive industries, particularly the ones that have like jobs that people don't love. I think you guys are seeing this across all of your industries, right? It's hard to hire people, particularly for jobs that suck, right? And so, like,
You heard it here first.
yeah, that's right. And so, like, you were talking about customer service, right? Like the extent to which these models have gotten better at handling stuff like customer service inquiries has gone up by like 100x in the last like 2 years. And you're not quite seeing that yet. I think we all get stuck with crappy chatbots all the time, but like that capability exists, and you're going to see that take over a bunch of markets. Like this hotel, 3 years from now, I got in last night, and no one picked up the phone when I tried to call room service because I wanted some water. And by 10:30, I tried calling again, and they were like, "We're closed." Right? Like.
So I brought him some water.
It was all taken care of. I had Matthew to help me out.
I taught him how to use a tap.
That's right. Exactly. That was actually the answer. I went to get the tap water, but like that is something that should not exist and will not exist at this hotel, in my guess, in the next 3 years. They're gonna have some virtual agent answer that query, make the order, get it all handled, right? And I think that's just where we're gonna be in the next 3 to 5 years.
So let's talk about the opportunities this creates for startups, in particular. And Sri, you started to sort of establish a framework, but Ash, I'll go to you first on this question. Maybe the simplest version is you invest in AI, ML type companies. What are you really excited about right now? Go.
I'll link it to the last question, which is I think the industry panels here in a couple of years will include the DeepMind for manufacturing, the DeepMind for pharma, the DeepMind for whatever else, for insurance. And what I'm saying there is there's a huge opportunity to build these general research organizations that build these very large, very powerful models and run them for a fee in a slightly more industry-specific way. As in what we have today is we have very large companies with very large budgets building these things. They're multi-year research projects. They require hundreds of millions of dollars in compute over the course of some of these experiments. And then we have startups trying to do very bespoke things and get their first customer in an industry and do everything they can to do that. And they leverage some of this stuff, but also just do a lot of manual data science. And I think what we'll start seeing, and where there's a huge opportunity, is for something sort of just below that top level, which is creating stuff that works just that little bit better than a general transformer model or a general model, but for a very specific industry, like for, understanding chemistry papers, for the purposes of finding treatments and drugs and whatever else. I think we'll see a huge opportunity there. So I think that's where the most exciting research and company building activity is going to be, from my perspective as an early stage investor in this field for the next couple of years. If I was a different sort of investor that had a multi-billion-dollar balance sheet, I think the opportunities and what's going to be really exciting is to build completely vertically integrated companies. And so what I mean by that are companies that just buy an existing company, like buy a business process outsourcing company, buy a staffing agency, buy a whatever, and get a handful of researchers from the field of machine learning and just make it their mission to automate the hell out of that business and take it from a 10% margin business to a 70% margin business. And it's a very different game, but there's going to be, I think there is a mindset shift that hasn't happened yet in the investing world, which will enable those sorts of investments to be made and those sorts of companies to be created.
In your first category, the deep mind for fill in the blank, are those companies going to be, they're going to build the model and then sell it to incumbents? Is that?
Yeah, I think their business model will look very similar to AWS or something like that. Because at the moment, Google sort of does this and Amazon sort of do this. They have recognition, image recognition, speech recognition, whatever else APIs that they sell, but they still require a huge amount of fine tuning for most sort of mission critical or at least like usable instances of that model to be deployed in the real world. So the next level below that, that's slightly more specialized but still powerful and general enough to work across a sufficiently broad base of customers, will probably have a similar business model to what Google and Amazon currently have for a lot of their AI products, but it will actually work and be deployed with much less effort, so customers will be more willing to pay for it.
Cool. Sri, what are you investing in?
I think I tried to tell you guys I'm an engineer. I'll further admit that I'm a singularly uncreative person, as many people who are technical people are. And I actually think that's like the most exciting thing that I'm looking forward to in the next few years to invest in, right? Is I happen to think that creativity is something that we sort of talk about. There's a certain type of person that's a creative person. I think that any of us can be creative, like meaning, like I don't think I could interior decorate my house, but if you gave me 10 pictures of like what my interior could look like I like that one the most, right? And I think that's true for a lot of creative endeavors where what you want is options. And I'll tell you, like I've been singularly impressed with how these generative models are able to give you options, right? Like I don't know if you guys have tracked another DeepMind model, this is OpenAI, DALL-E 2, but like you give it something like, hey, give me an astronaut sitting on a pool chair, right? And it actually generates an image that looks like that. And you're like, holy crap, how did this possible? And I don't think anyone cares for necessarily art generated by that. Although if that's a market, let me know, and I'll maybe invest in that. But I think there's a whole bunch of things, like everything from architecture to interior design to to fashion, where having the AI actually generate like, here's 30 options. Which one do you like the most? To content on a website, to the pictures you choose, to creating short form video that like for advertising. Like I think all these things are things that models can do a pretty good job of. And maybe it gets you 90% of the way there with 17 options you can look like instead of hiring an agency to make you one version that you have to tweak, right? And I think that's going to disrupt a whole bunch of the creative industries. I really, and I see that, like I said, in everything from, I've been talking mostly sort of audio visual stuff, but I think that's going to be true in text as well. And that's probably where I'm most excited to invest in the next 18 months.
Yeah, that's a really nice thing to think about. I mean, all artists are inspired by their environment, and the artists of the past would sit in front of one barn and paint that same barn as all the seasons went past throughout the year. Imagine that same artist sitting in front of a screen that's sending them images of 50 different barns in lots of different lighting conditions with lots of different things moving around it and whatever else. They'd paint completely different pictures. And just the ability to have a much more rich set of inputs allows all of us to be more creative, I think. I agree with that.
views down there? Any views down there on startups
Do you want to
enabled by machine learning?
Yeah, so I think we have been quite, again, talking from LSEC's perspective, we have been quite practical, I would say, in this space. So we made a minority investment of this company called Model Q, San Francisco-based firm. What we have done with them, they have this very cool capability, which we have kind of like collaboratively now integrated to Microsoft Teams, which is basically pushing insights for end users. So if a salesperson has a meeting with a client, this Model Q application is basically pushing that these are the latest things that have been happening with that client. These are the next things that you need to know when you go to that conversation. And obviously there's lots of applicability then across all of the financial kind of like end user workflows from there. So you look at wealth management workflow or trading workflow. So that kind of capability is really, really useful. But I think I like the art. I am actually very into that, and I think it's a really difficult use case to resolve. Like if you go to like Saatchi art, for example, and pros like, okay, I want to look for a certain kind of painting. Very difficult one to resolve, you know?
Yep.
Yeah, I would say it's a little bit also on the data monetization. A lot of the startups, they're always asking for more data, and maybe they have a myopic view of how much their data is valuable, right? So they're very myopic view on their first-party data. They can explore much more what's happening on the second party before even going to third party and augment. And tying in a little bit, deconstructing the data that they have, really understand what's the value and translate that to value, right? Instead of just kind of just a pure product view. That's something that we're viewing a lot. And yeah, creating those solutions to really framework everything that they have.
Cool. One more question from me, and then we'll open it up to the audience for a couple of questions. We're 10 years forward. What industry will we say was most radically changed, either from a cost perspective or a quality perspective, either one, by these forces that we're talking about? One industry.
Not healthcare.
Not healthcare,
I
okay.
think it will be healthcare, actually.
So
You
was
think
I.
it will be
So am I. But
Exactly.
hoping.
Oh, you hoping?
Yeah.
I don't want to double down on manufacturing, but don't think manufacturing as an industry. Everybody has it, let's say, like as a horizontal. Like everybody has some ties with manufacturing, right? You have a process one way or another, or you're very heavily dependent on that. So that's where things are gonna change because we've seen a lot of investment going into the more marketing organization, the product, but we're not seeing on the more base on the initial stages, and that's where I feel like the next frontier and the next big threshold is. Yeah.
Manufacturing, okay.
Yeah, I think I kind of answered. I think I'm hoping it will be healthcare, to be honest. But yeah, that's
Hoping
it.
for healthcare?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm hoping it's healthcare, but I think it'll be retail. I think it'll be just helping us more easily buy more crap. That's probably what's going to be completely different in terms of the experience, the speed, the cost. Everything is going to change so much over the next couple of years.
And do you think that's one that the incumbents win or startups win?
Good question. I think it'll be a startup, as in it will be a new company, but that new company will probably be heavily funded and agglomerate a few other different companies, like Shein, like for example. It'll be something that is relatively vertically integrated and can spot a trend ahead of time and then get the product to market quicker than anyone else and actually manufacture or help manufacture it. So it'll be a new but very large company.
On that end, like we're seeing that already, right? Where it's what we discussed before, where we're not working at silo. We're not just looking at KPIs. So specifically in retail, a lot of our clients, they're doing that assortment optimization. They're really trying to understand not only what a person is going to buy in that specific store, but what the person is going to buy a year from now. Mm-hmm. How that's going to affect your distribution centers, your supply chain, your R&D before that. Mm-hmm. How that changes your sales operations, how does that change your marketing, your pricing, all that. So that end-to-end on retail is definitely happening. There are definitely a lot of startups there, but startups can only bring a small piece, right? That holistic view that we've been discussing so far in a lot of these speaker notes, like that's I think the other big game changer, yeah.
I'm going to go with something that's like halfway blend of what these guys have said, which is the restaurant industry. Hear me out, right? I think in some ways you could think of restaurants as small-scale manufacturers. And they're not particularly efficient small scale manufacturers. I'd further say that like, obviously like the world's changed in the last couple of years, and it's like, I think created probably 20 years of disruption in 2 years for that whole industry. And if you think about it, like I think you guys have probably heard this stat that some enormous percentage of restaurants fail within the first couple of years. And the reason why is stuff like their location, the menu design, the theme that they have for the restaurant, all that's static, right? They make this decision, they stick with it, right? Like pricing, all this stuff. And in a world where there's a lot of delivery and people aren't showing up, I think it's contingent on the restaurant industry to be a lot more thoughtful about like maybe we should design a new menu, a new theme, and like price it differently and try what things you want to add to the specific entree to make it more appealing to somebody. And I think that is something that will be optimized significantly over the course of the next few years. And we'll just be buying stuff from an app on our phone and not realizing there's like an enormous amount of data science behind the thing that you picked. And you really didn't have a choice. You just bought the thing that they wanted you to buy. So that's my answer.
Any questions from the audience?
Two questions, one specifically for Ash and one for the panel. So why did you say not healthcare? Was that more of a rank decision, or that you're not necessarily bearish on healthcare, but rather less bullish when answering the question about where do you see most potential? So you see retail as number one and healthcare somewhere down the line. And if so, then why is it so far, right? And then second question, what do you guys think about sort of the emerging trend of synthetic data generation that seems to be popping up in different verticals?
So just to define healthcare, I define as delivery of treatment, not development of treatment or therapeutics. And the reason I said that is just because adoption cycles are thankfully and deliberately very slow, because you have to make sure it works before you put it in someone's body. So that's all. I'll jump into synthetic data, give everyone else 2 seconds to think about it. Just recently have seen it get a huge, get a lot better. There's been a huge amount of development in some of the models that Sri mentioned that has taken that from where it was when I started looking at the fields, which was involving a lot of game designers and artists and a lot of manual work on the synthetic image generation side, and then on the tabular side, very limited applications, to something that is starting to work pretty well. So I think that product space has improved probably in the order of sort of 3 to 5x in terms of the cost quality ratio of synthetic data in the last 18 months.
Yeah, I think like to me it integrates with something Alex said about ML ops, right? Like I think that synthetic data is going to be necessary for enterprises to adopt machine learning at scale. And I think that like the question for me is like, can a synthetic data company survive, or is a synthetic data / ML ops the company, the thing that like sort of becomes a big business? And like I don't have a final answer on that, but I really do think it's an important part of like sort of the success for machine learning within companies.
Yeah, I think the step change there is going to be when you detect an error in a model and synthetic data is generated and used to retrain the model autonomously. That's going to be the step change in the utilization of synthetic data, when that's possible, either through the right integrations and the right degree of quality and whatever else.
I mean, I would say synthetic data is moving a little bit from the pure deep learning application, so like vision, speech, a little bit less text, that's been plateaued a little bit. But one of the beautiful conversations yesterday, I think Avery was that, there's a whole concept of digital twin, right? Where digital twin, usually you always thought about manufacturing, different processes, how do you capture that digital twin? Now you want a digital twin of everything, your HR, anything in your organization. So that's where we're seeing a lot of that synthetic data as another, not only augmentation, but another view of what's the data that I can capture. Because think about it from a training perspective, right? In a lot of cases, you don't have that much information for some very specific cases that you want to synthesize. So I'm seeing that shift on a whole new stream of what data you can use and how you're manufacturing for, not the usual industries, not the usual processes. Yeah.
One more question.
So a friend of mine is looking into automated machine learning based automated chef. So there's like the problem with consistency, like waste of product. But he's facing a problem whether he should go after like restaurants or like directly contact customers. Like so, like thinking about like scaling this business, which route do you think is a better way to go?
So I think what you're asking is that like I had made this comment about like should you build your own vertical integrated business or should you sell to existing companies? If you had asked me this question 12 months ago, I would have said there's no reason to try to sell into the existing restaurant industry because they are not buyers of technology and have a tough time ingesting technology. I will tell you that like labor issues that they have all faced in the last 12 months has had them all sort of like rethinking that, right? That being said, like full disclosure, I'm an investor in a company that like trying to basically went down the path of like, hey, we should just build our own kitchens in a bunch of cities and go dominate because the world has changed a lot and existing incumbents weren't designed for delivery first, et cetera. But like my 2 cents would be like, I would at least test the hypothesis that incumbents are willing to buy.